Welcome to this week's Iraq Briefing, where we talk about the top events shaping Iraq today. I'm Eric Gustafson.
And this is Omar Nadawi.
Today's burning topic: why is Iraq still torching billions? We're discussing Iraq's massive gas flaring crisis, a crisis with far-reaching economic, climate, health, and geopolitical consequences.
And quickly, for those who are not familiar with the term, gas flaring refers to the process of burning natural gas that rises to the surface alongside with crude oil. It's a problematic side effect of the oil industry that wastes enormous amounts of energy and also releases large amounts of pollutants into the atmosphere, which harms the environment, of course, and also causes a lot of health problems for communities near and far.
Now, when it comes to gas flaring, Iraq is the world's third worst offender. The country is burning incredibly large volumes of natural gas each year, surpassed only by Russia and Iran. If you can imagine, just across the Iraqi landscape, 1,400 flames roaring 24/7. Between 2013 and 2019, as Iraq ramped up oil production, gas flaring jumped from 423 billion cubic feet per year to 565 to 632. And available data in 2023 suggests that those volumes have not since fallen. So I want you to just picture the Empire State Building, hollowed out, filled with gas. Now line up 17,000 of those skyscrapers side by side, and that's the space that you'd need to hold 632 billion cubic feet of natural gas.
And that's a good analogy, Eric. That gas is not just going to stay in place. The atmosphere does not recognize national borders. So it is a local problem with global ramifications. The gas that Iraq flares releases up to 35 million metric tons of carbon dioxide each year, which flows into the atmosphere, everyone's atmosphere. And that's nearly 10% of the global gas flaring emissions. And it's not just CO2.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the CO2 emissions are only part of the problem. Each year, Iraq emits an estimated 2.3 million tons of fugitive methane. Now, what are we talking about? Basically, when you have the gas flaring, it's about burning the gas that's coming to the surface. But because the combustion isn't 100% efficient, you also still have some of the methane escaping into the atmosphere. So 2.3 million tons of fugitive methane per year. Now, while that's a smaller volume compared to the carbon dioxide emissions, methane has a devastating climate impact. According to the EPA, methane is 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide in trapping heat in the atmosphere. And let's not forget, we have not only climate change, but it is accelerating. The last 10 years have been the warmest on record. And just last year, we exceeded 1.55 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. So we're already beyond that guideline that was set by the Paris Agreement.
Right. And even for those who don't really care that much about the environment, this is also a big economic leak. There is so much economic damage that gas flaring causes to Iraq's economy. Based on data from 2024, about 40% of the gas that Iraq produces along with its oil, about 3.1 billion cubic feet per day, 40% of that gets flared instead of being utilized. In terms of direct losses, that's about $2 billion each year lost in terms of potential revenue that could have been generated. So you have this gas that could have been used to, be sold or to power millions of homes in a country that has chronic rolling blackouts. Instead, it's burnt, and Iraq goes and buys gas and electricity from Iran at the cost of $6 or $8 billion a year in order to fill that energy demand gap. Obviously, that's quite problematic, but there's also the less visible indirect loss of economic activity. That's, what happens when your factories are not running or your offices are not open because there's no electricity. And that's a little harder to measure, But World Bank estimates indicate that Iraq loses about $40 billion a year from from unrealized economic activity. And it gets worse than that, actually.
People living in the village of Bahla take visitors here. They say gas flaring from oil production decimated their generations old palm trees, leaving behind nothing but trunks. When we met the village elders, they said everyone knows someone who is diagnosed with or who has died from cancer.
I already have cancer and only God helps me. We continue to be worried about our families and loved ones.
The Basra Health Department in southern Iraq says the pollution from oil production is making people and animals in the area sick.
So, as that Al Jazeera news clip shows, there's also a impact on human health. People who are living near the gas flares are getting sick. Now, how near are we talking about? Flares are as close as 3.2 kilometers from residential areas in Basra. That's 2 miles. In Kirkuk, our analysis of satellite images show flares less than 1 kilometer from communities. Now, that's basically against current Iraqi law that states that oil and gas operations should be at least 10 kilometers away from human habitation. In just 3 years, between 2015 and 2018, health officials in Basra saw a 20% increase in cancer cases. And in addition to, the cancer and respiratory issues, you have the oily residue that falls in the areas nearby, which is causing skin diseases, polluting the water, and even affecting agriculture, killing plants. I highly recommend, we'll include a link in the description, the 2022 documentary by BBC, Under Poisoned Skies, where it talks about this impact. And you have Iraqi civil society and academics and researchers who were documenting the impact on human health. Interestingly, just as an aside, unfortunately, the reaction from the Iraqi government was not necessarily, yes, we're going to make sure we address it, but instead trying to silence those who are bringing it to the world's attention. Not a good look. So hopefully that's going to change and there'll be a real commitment to address the human harms.
Right. And even if all that harm to health and the environment is not enough to convince people of the scale of this problem, there's also the fact that flaring has, in Iraq's case, has serious geopolitical implications. One of the big problems that face Iraq's electricity sector is that it's precariously dependent on Iran for much of its fuel, as well as electricity imports. About a third of Iraq's electricity is produced using gas that's imported from Iran. And Iraq also imports about 5%, or at least used to import until recently, 5% of its electricity directly from Iran. And these Iranian gas and electricity supplies are unreliable because of political problems, Iranian decisions, and also domestic demand considerations inside Iran. And just last November, Iran cut the gas supplies to Iraq for several weeks, and that caused the Iraqi grid to lose 5,500 megawatts of power. And that's about a fifth of all of the power available in Iraq. So that caused serious shortages across the country. There's also the issue that Iranian energy exports are coming under increasing scrutiny from Washington. Just in March, the Trump administration decided to cancel a sanctions waiver that used to allow Iraq to import electricity from Iran. And the other sanctions waiver that allows Iraq to buy and pay for gas imported from Iran could also be canceled any day now.
Yeah, so that's the geopolitical impact. Thanks, Omar. Now, let's talk a little bit about what recent administrations in Iraq have done. They have been setting ambitious targets, and they have been working with global energy companies to reduce flaring. There was a flagship project that was launched in 2013. You can imagine the backdrop following the Kyoto protocols and the Paris Agreement. So there was more of a commitment by Iraqi governments to fight climate change, cut emissions. That flagship project was with the Basra Gas Company, and that Basra Gas Company is now capturing 900 million cubic feet per day. That's, again, the volume of a large skyscraper-filled balloon of gas every 24 hours. Previously, more than half the gas was just being burned into the atmosphere. And now that figure has fallen to just under 40%. The government of Iraq has also signed on to a zero routine flaring by 2030 agreement with World Bank and others. And the Iraq's oil minister has vowed to reach zero gas flaring by 2028. Now, further evidence of the Iraqi government's commitment have been some of these recent deals. In 2023, there was a mega deal with Total Energies to capture 0.6 billion cubic feet per day from 5 Basra fields. The target is to capture 70% of all the gas that's coming up to the surface by the end of 2025. But targets have been missed in the past, and there are real obstacles.
There is no stability for 6 or 7 years. Every 2 years there is some challenge, political challenge, security challenge. Gas is long-term investment. It needs some stability, and it needs some cash and commitment.
Right. So just as the former Iraqi oil minister alluded to here, there are a lot of problems that can get in the way and derail these plans. First of all, there is the fact that projects to capture and process and transport the natural gas are expensive, take a lot of commitment, and take a lot of time and resources to complete. So oil companies that are operating in Iraq's fields, they find it cheaper to pay fines rather than invest in all that expensive infrastructure, which leaves Iraq to fend for itself and try to find deals with contractors and find the resources to undertake the work on its own. And it's expensive. The Basra Gas Company initiative that Eric mentioned, in order to increase its ability, its capacity from 900 million cubic feet per day to 1.4 billion cubic feet per day, that's going to cost more than $3 billion in several years. And that's only to capture gas from 3 important oil fields in Basra. But there are more than a dozen oil fields in Basra province alone. It's not just there. There's also the fact that Iraq keeps increasing its oil production. The issue here is that more than 2/3 of Iraq's natural gas reserves are associated and linked to crude oil. It's not like sitting in a neat bubble isolated from everything else under the ground. It's combined with the oil. So as the oil rises, as more oil rises to the surface, more gas rises to the surface. Right now, Iraq is producing 4.5 million barrels per day of oil, but the country wants to increase that volume to 6 million barrels per day by 2029, and even larger and more ambitious targets, perhaps unrealistic, have been discussed in the past, including 9 million barrels and even 13 million barrels per day. So, of course, whatever the increase is, there's going to result in a commensurate increase in the gas that's going to rise to the surface and has to be dealt with. Even setting aside active oil production, there's more exploration going on, and that's inevitably going to result in more gas coming to the surface. Iraq is keen on increasing its proven oil reserves. Just last year, the country signed 14 deals with oil companies, mostly Chinese oil companies, to explore for oil across the country and to bring more billions of barrels of proven oil reserves onto the books. And that's inevitably going to lead to more gas and more fields that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, that's right, Omar. And you would think that at this point, when it comes to these new deals, the contracts would be made public, and we would see that there'd be a clear effort to capture the gas as part of those projects, as a requirement for those contracts. Unfortunately, there is a lack of transparency. Just weeks ago, Iraq signed a deal with BP to redevelop the Kirkuk fields, but it's opaque. We don't know, in terms of that BP agreement and all the related contracts for redeveloping those fields, to what extent will gas flaring be addressed. In addition, the government of Iraq has stopped publishing monthly data on flaring and utilization of the gas that's coming to the surface, and also even revenue. In March of 2024, Iraq's oil ministry claimed that Iraq had reduced gas flaring by 61%. Amazing, right? But those claims were met with widespread skepticism across Iraq, Iraqi media and civil society and researchers, particularly because there was a lack of details about where the reductions had occurred and how. So with that, let's go into some recommendations, Omar.
Right. Transparency, I think, is a very crucial point here. I think in order to address this transparency problem, the oil ministry perhaps could start working with oil companies to start releasing honest data about the associated gas production, utilization, and flaring to provide a reliable baseline for measuring progress. And this would boost public confidence in government policies and also demonstrate to other stakeholders who are interested in Iraq's energy sector, such as the United States, that Iraq is taking gradual but steady steps to achieve less flaring or achieve flaring reductions and also generate greater energy independence, particularly from Iran. Another issue that I think comes to mind, especially that you mentioned Kirkuk, is the fact that there is no unified policy across the country to address gas flaring. The oil ministry recently said that all of the gas that's currently flared is going to have contracts and plans in place to stop that flaring. But there's one problem here, is that there have been no contracts, really, no public plans that have been released about doing anything about the gas that's being flared north of Baghdad. So nothing about Diyala or Salahuddin or Ninawa. Only rudimentary information about what the deal for Kirkuk says. So that's going to be I think an important goal, to start initiating conversations with the Kurdistan regional government and with provincial governments to have a unified policy about addressing all of the oil fields that are producing and flaring gas across the country, especially in those disputed territories where there are competing claims and there's no clear idea of who's really in charge.
Right. Those are great recommendations on transparency and a unified policy. So now I'm going to give you two more recommendations. The government of Iraq should start putting health and the environment first in picking gas capture projects. So for example, you should prioritize those gas flares that are very close to communities that are being directly impacted, where we're seeing increases in cancer rates and respiratory problems and all kinds of other issues. By the way, I would also argue that the government of Iraq needs to start collecting that data, and that data should be public information. That would certainly add more pressure, I think, to accelerate this process. A second recommendation is a global tech challenge to invite firms and universities to put forward flare capture solutions. There's been a lot of new technologies, new innovations, and to begin to look at how that can be applied in Iraq, whether it's on a small scale or on a larger scale, and even how you can mitigate the health impact and the environmental impact of these oil and gas operations, what can be addressed or how that can be also addressed. So those are two more recommendations. Do you have some more for us, Omar?
These are great ideas, but these plans will take years to develop and start making an impact. Meanwhile, there is a moral responsibility to help communities that are in harm's way. And I think the government should perhaps consider steps such as creating a fund to support communities that are most impacted by flaring, to improve health services that are offered there and to help the sick recover, and also maybe provide compensation or resettlement support for those who are trying to, relocate their lives from the areas near the flares to somewhere else that's a little safer for them and where they can resume their agriculture and economic life. And finally, to encourage compliance with the law when it comes to reducing flaring, I think Iraq's oil ministry and environment ministry should increase the penalties and fines for oil companies that are flaring gas and are not taking action to mitigate the problem. So because the fines right now are too small, we're not going to see a change in behavior, but increase the fines, and that could create more incentives for the companies to take actions on their own.
Yeah, absolutely, Omar. I mean, there needs to be more of an incentive for these companies to take action, and keeping in mind that there are enormous harms and costs that are just being transferred to the Iraqi people, to the world. So, let's make sure that the fines are commensurate to the harm being done. So that's probably among the most important recommendations. So thanks so much for joining us. A lot of what we just talked about in this video, you can find in our briefing on gas flaring in Iraq. It's actually right on our homepage, enablingpeace.org. We'll also include a link down below so you can take a deeper dive with that brief, as well as a link to the BBC documentary and other resources for you. So please like, share, and subscribe, and maybe click that notification bell so that you are in touch with our regular Iraq briefings. And let's all work together to end Iraq's gas flaring crisis. Thanks so much for joining us. Masalama.